up in the snow belt and very, very cold. And I don't remember if it was me or Ed's son Dave who put the ad on the bulletin board looking for someone to help chop wood. And we had a wood stove, and we wanted to partner with somebody to help us get wood cut for the winter. And so I remember Dave walking up to me, and Dave's about 6'4", 3'4", something, big guy. And he walks up to me wearing this big cowboy hat, and he said, so are you the one looking to cut wood? And I said, yes. And that started a wonderful relationship. And I don't suppose there's anyone closer than David Harrell. And so it's a joy for me to have his dad, Ed Harrell, who's been here once or twice before over the years. And I'm just thrilled and honored to have him to come. And I'll have him introduce himself, his family, and what he has to share with us this morning. Ed, come on up.
Fine. Thank you, sir.
Lord, thank you so much for Ed. Just pray that you'll open our hearts and minds as we listen. And I pray that you'll give Ed clarity. You'll give him what he needs to deliver this powerful message to us on your sovereignty and the way in which you and your purposes prevail. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. Now, I don't know which mic I'm on, this one, so I'll move that one out of the way a little bit. Now then, I recognize some faces. I have been here twice before, and if you would like to take a little nap, then you've got the next 45 minutes to do that. Okay, it indeed is an honor to come back to the church here. Now, I have maybe some new news for some of you, but all of my story happened some 72 years ago, so that means I'm an old man. Today is the 10th of September. It's the 10th of October. You can wish me a happy birthday, my 93rd birthday. Okay. Now then, just in the last month, just some news that some of you maybe do not know. You know, the Indianapolis was sunk July 30, 1945. So 72 years now. You know what? They have found the USS Indianapolis something like the last month, and they gave me a call just a day or two afterwards, and the gentleman that called me was the captain of a ship that was named after the USS Indianapolis, and it was the USS Indianapolis submarine. Now, after 25 years, it's done away with, and there is another USS Indianapolis like the New Yorker, and it is up to date in every respect. Now then, they called me, and my response to the good captain of the submarine, Captain Cody, was, "Thank you, Lord." I was so in hopes that they could find it, knowing that it's somewhere in the deepest part of the sea on the way from Guam to the Philippines. And, okay, they found it. And it was about 3.5 miles down. And since then, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. I've been interviewed all over the country. CBS even sent someone down from New York to interview me, and that hasn't ceased. And then the emails. How'd you like to go to your computer and you look, 93 emails and I'm my own foreman and boss and whatever. And, well, okay, I have some more news. Commander Hoshimoto that sank us, that submarine I-58, Japan has just notified us in the last week. We have found I-58. Now, we sank it in, I think it was in 1946. We did not want the Russians to get one of Japan's newest, best submarines, and so we sank it. And they found it now. I don't know what they're going to do with it. And I might say I don't know what they're going to do with the Indianapolis, because nothing can be touched. But I can see and recognize some things that I knew. As an example, the bow of the ship would be off because I was sleeping under the barrels of number 1 turret forward, and a big gaping hole through the bottom of the ship. And, okay, now then, let me take you back, or else I'll bring you up to date by going back. As a 17-year-old boy in western Kentucky, knowing what was happening in the Pacific, and I see a few old heads in here. Anyone remember Walter Winchell? Anyone? Walter Winchell? Okay, we had, back then, we had an old Silvertone radio, battery operated, and I'm hearing what's happening in the Pacific. And I tell my dad, Dad, I don't want to wait and be drafted. They had my number. I said, I want to get in the Marine Corps. And I go to the draft board in Murray, Kentucky, and I said, I want to volunteer for the Marine Corps. And they said, you have to wait till your number comes up. And I said, no, I want in now. And a couple of ladies talked to each other, and they said, we have room for him in the July of 47. So anyway, 43. And they called me up. I went to Evansville, Indiana, and passed the physical. When I tell them I want the Marine Corps, they say, you are going to go to Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, I'd been in Indiana, but I'd never been to Indianapolis, and I go there, and I became a Marine and went to San Diego to boot camp, and after boot camp, they said, I guess Private Harrell, you're going to go to sea school. Well, I needed schooling, and so I go to sea school, and after sea school, they send me up to San Francisco, and you can imagine what a young, then 18-year-old boy, going on 19 maybe in October of that year. There was the big USS Indianapolis, twice the length of a football field, and that's to be my home for the duration of the war. And soon after I went aboard, Kwajalein, Inuitok, I was at Saipan, at Tinian, at Guam, sea battle of the Philippine Seas, where our task force that day shot down 403 Japanese aircraft. I was down in Peleliu. I was at Iwo Jima, 3 airstrikes on Tokyo. I was at Okinawa. We weren't so fortunate there. We received a kamikaze plane, a big gaping hole all the way through the ship. We lost several of our boys, but we had to come back to the States for repair. And soon after repair, we looked out on the dock there at Hunters Point, San Francisco, and there was all kinds of Navy and Marine Corps brass out there, and there was a big crate, I don't know, 12 feet or so long, maybe 4 or 5 feet high, 4 or 5 feet in width, big crate. And my Marine captain said, then Corporal Harrell, follow that big crate and take it in the port hangar deck and station a guard. I did that. And then momentarily there were two proposed to be Air Force officers coming aboard, and they had a cargo with them, something in a little metal container cage with a padlock on it. And again, my Marine captain said, follow them up to a certain compartment and station a guard on the outside of the hatch. Captain Parks, who are they and what are we guarding? He says, you know, we don't know, but let me get ahead of the story and say, they were not Air Force officers. They were scientists from Los Alamos, New Mexico. You know what's happening there? And what they had with them was half of the uranium that America owned. The other half was back in the States, and once we reached our destination, they would meet us. And on, let me get my date, but it was, I guess it was something like July the 13th. We had for Tinian Island. We arrived there, some 5,300 miles. Would you believe we made that in 10 days in a heavy cruiser? We were cruising. We delivered a cargo. We didn't know what we had. And then from there, then we back up from Tinian Island to Guam, and Captain Parks asked for his sailing orders. And since our ship was the flagship of Admiral Spruance also, we knew the scuttlebutt that indeed America would land some 2 million troops on the southern Big Island of Japan. Great Britain would join us with another. But now, we are told then, yes, you're to go from Guam to the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan. We headed out sometime maybe the 28th of July. So 29th, I know we're long gone, making our trip now to the Philippines. But on the night of July the 30th, about 14 minutes past midnight, I remember that so vividly. I had the watch that night till 12 o'clock. And 12 o'clock, I'm off watch. Now, we'd been traveling, say, 32 knots. For you don't know what a knot is, let's just say 32 miles an hour, which in a ship like that, that's fast. But now we've slowed down to about 17 knots, or, 15 miles an hour. That's faster than you can walk and run very far, yes. But now then, here we are. We're on our way, but about 14 minutes past midnight now, on July the 30th, Commander Hoshimoto was waiting somewhat at the crossroads there. He had not been successful the whole war in getting any ship. And when we left Guam, Captain McVeigh asked for an escort. They refused him an escort. Now, the Indianapolis had no underwater sound gear, so we couldn't pick up a submarine. Commander Hoshimoto had a little periscope, and he had it just sticking up out of the water. He picked us up several miles out, 10 miles out maybe, and all he had to do was to wait, and he waited. At about 14 minutes past midnight, he tells the crew, load the torpedoes. They're loaded, and two boys are in what they call the Cayoton. They could get in that, they could be fired off, and they could control that. The only thing, they could not be recovered. Okay, so about 14 minutes past midnight now, well, Commander Hoshimoto sees that he's got a good target. Stand by, fire, fire, fire. He fired 6 torpedoes. Now, I'd gotten off a watch at 12 o'clock, and a good captain had told us now, since we had been in such a rush and nearly burned the motors up, he had slowed down to some 17 knots, and it's 110 degrees outside, no air conditioning on a ship of that size back then, and so he got on the speaker at the change of the watch, say late in the evening, and said, you have permission to get your blanket and make you a pallet out on the open deck anywhere aboard the ship. And so when I got off a watch then at 12 o'clock, I go below deck and I get my blanket. I didn't get my kapok jacket. I don't need that. And so I go all the way forward of that ship. And the night before, I'd slept in a little raft on the top of what we call number 1 turret, the big 8-inch guns, 3 big barrels of 8-inch guns. And there's the second turret and the third turret. I'd slept up there the night before, but I tell my Marine buddy, I'm going to sleep right down here on the deck. And so I made me a pallet right down on the open deck. I used the arch of my shoe as a pillow, put my blanket over it, and kind of covered it over a little bit because we're moving about 15 miles an hour, so it's a little breezy. And at night, you know, without the sun, it's, you know, it's comfortable, you know, but not in the daytime. And so I realized now that something terrible has happened. I'm sleeping under the barrels of that number 1 turret. I could look forward of me, and I probably maybe, I don't know, 60 to 80 feet or so from the very tip, but maybe 30 feet of that bow of the ship is cut off. That first torpedo hit there, and the second one back close to the marine compartment, a big gaping hole back there, but no one lived to tell about that. And I realized nearly immediately that something terrible has happened to this ship. You can imagine if the bow of that ship is cut off, and we're about 30 feet wide or so back to that point, and 2.5 decks deep, we become a funnel. Those 4 big screws are pushing, pushing, pushing. You could feel and nearly hear the bulkheads down below breaking. And I know that I've got to make my way back to midship. That's where I receive my orders as to what I'm to do, whether or not we're in combat firing at something or whatever. And as I make my way back to my emergency station, knowing that this ship is sinking, it's doomed. But as I started aft, there were those who were coming out of the forward area, and most of that on the main deck forward was officers' quarters. And as they were coming out, they were in their night skivvies mostly, and maybe they had touched their hands on a hot bulkhead, left the skin of the hand on the bulkhead, and maybe they're flash burned, and so they're out pleading for someone to give them some assistance, but that's not my responsibility and really nothing that this Marine could do. I know that I've got an emergency station that I'm to get to, and so on my way back then, I realized I don't have a life jacket. My life jacket is down in my locker, and even by now, the ship, the forward area is beginning to list, and water is just all over the front part of the main bow of that ship. And so you know the ship is doomed. But I get to the quarterdeck, my Marine lieutenant is there, and I see all those big canvas bags of kapok life jackets, and Lieutenant Stauffer permission to cut down some of the life jackets. And his response was, not until we get word to abandon ship. The ship is sinking. In fact, by now or in just a few minutes, normally that quarterdeck would be 8 feet above waterline on the starboard side. there's water on the quarterdeck, so we are listing like so. The first 100 yards of the ship is already under, and that fantail, those screws are pushing, pushing, pushing. No word could get back to cut them off. And so when I asked Lieutenant Stauffer permission to cut those life jackets down, his response was, not until we get word to abandon ship. The ship is sinking. There was a Navy commander that came through the hatch from below deck, and I recognized him, but he was nearly beyond recognition in that he was flash burned. And so some sailor, when he saw he didn't have a life jacket, he hollered out, "Get the commander a life jacket." And they began to cut those down, and I managed to reach in and get me a life jacket. But now the ship is sinking, but there's no PA system, no electrical power aboard ship. That's cut off completely. And so the good captain cannot get word everywhere to abandon ship. He had sent someone below deck to see if the ship was salvageable. They never made it back out either. But finally, word trickles down like an echo. Abandon ship, abandon ship, abandon ship. Finally reached down to abandon ship. And there might have been maybe a couple hundred of us on the quarterdeck, and to rush over to that port side and look out into the blackness of the night. The starboard side, there's water on the quarterdeck. You can hardly stand on the deck, and it's about equal to the same degree if you stepped over the rail. But to go over and to hold on to that rail and to look out into eternity, what would you do if you were in that circumstance and realize that you're being forced to leave your home for these few years? You're forced to abandon ship. You look out at that water and you see all of that black oil on it. You've got to get into that. You're in a hurry to get into that, to get away from the ship, or else it's going to pull you down with it. And so I go over and I hold on to that rail, and I looked out into what I could imagine. This is the end of life. Life is over. And you begin to think back home, mom and dad, two older sister and a younger sister, 6 younger brothers. And I tell him that I don't want to die. I promised him many things. Now, may I say, I knew to whom I was praying. I knew because I had given my heart to the Lord Jesus Christ as my own personal Savior. So now I'm looking out into eternity, and I'm praying. I tell him I don't want to die. And I made him many promises that no doubt I haven't lived up to, but through these 93 years, since then, I've tried. And also, there was a certain brunette that said that she would wait for me. Get ahead of my story now, and I'll come back. But she waited. I tried to call her again this morning, and she's still waiting when I left this morning. Now, we just celebrated our 70th wedding anniversary back July the 25th, and she was 91 on the 24th. And, okay, that's part of my story. Okay, now then, I'm leaving the ship, and I'm praying, and I wonder, is this the end of life? But as maybe just a little Sunday school boy, I learned something, and I'm a Christian now too, and I'm praying, and I know that I am in touch with the Lord. And he did not speak to me audibly, but words came to me. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm scared to death. And yet I have that promise. I'm going to make it. And I waited and waited until most everyone was off. And I climbed over that rail and made 2 big steps down through that greasy side of the ship and jumped into the water feet first. And that cape-out jacket came up over my head, and then I try to get my head above that oil, and that's impossible. But nevertheless, I swam away from the ship to see that the first 100 yards is already under, see that fantail come high in the air, see those 4 big screws still turning. I'm down here looking up at a little silhouette of light from the explosions aboard ship. I see boys up there. Any place that they could get off, they jumped, and some jumped into those screws. I saw the ship as she went completely under, thinking that it's going to pull me under if I'm too close. But no, no, no. Visualize this. The bow of the ship is off, the hatches are closed, and the ship is going down nose first. All of that air in there is going to come out, and if there's anything open, the last thing that is that air coming out, and it's pushing out, and it's bubbles, bubbles, noise, noise. And I saw the ship as she went under swim out to the first group of boys out here, begin to take inventory. We had several that did not have life jackets. Many, or some at least, were injured that didn't make it till daybreak. And then I, as a Marine, I wondered if any Marines, well, I found one Marine that had come aboard maybe in Pearl when we came through a transfer into our group. And the second Marine, I was his squad leader. Here I found Spooner and those 2, but the first one I found, he had multiple breaks, no doubt, in his body, and I could tell that he's not going to make it. And he maybe told me his name, but I could see his face, but I knew he was one of the new boys, but who is he? And I tried to caress him and hold him and comfort him, and saw him pass into eternity. And then I located the other Marine then, to find my buddy Spooner, to find that he had gone into all of that oil head first. He had all of that oil in his eyes. And you can imagine now, how are you going to get that out? Basically, you aren't. You can wipe, and that 100-degree sun, if you got some salt water on you, and you're in the sun very long, that sun dries that salt, and then you got powdered salt, or you've got salt anyhow and oil. So Spooner, just early on, he couldn't see, and he needed some assistance. I may get back to him a little later, but nevertheless, here we are. 2 Marines, one's gone now, several others gone. This is about 14 minutes past midnight. Now it's daylight. Sharks out around the group. And you could imagine what that does to you. Yes, you think that they're going to attack you, but in fairness to the sharks, I would say early on, no. You could see that big fin swimming around, and you're scared to death that, yes, they're going to come in sooner or later, but you try to stay in a group, and it's difficult, and so you form a circle. You fasten your cape-out jacket on to buddies, and you form a circle, and you try to keep everyone in the circle. Now, we're in maybe 8-foot swells, so you go up on the swell, you kind of drift with the swell together. Okay, but it isn't long till someone breaks loose from the group, and you see him out there, you hear a blood-curdling scream, and you look and you see You see that kapok jacket go under. You see shark fins, and then like a fish cork, that kapok jacket brings that body to the surface, and then sharks, sharks, sharks. You dare not to go. Dare not to go. You go the other way. Sometime later, though, you check your buddies to see who he might have been, and you find out that the bottom torso is gone, or is disemboweled, a leg is gone. And that's going to happen so many, many, many times. Let's go through that first day and the second night. Now, after the first day, at night, the seas kind of calm down some. Instead of those 8-foot swells or so, or more sometimes, it's just a kind of a rocking, maybe 3 or 4 foot swells and so. But it's cooler at night. And now you get out here tomorrow when it rains, and let's say it's 85 degrees, and you get out in a nice breeze and you have no clothing on hardly. What's going to happen? Your body temperature is going to start dropping. And 98.6, you know, down every hour a degree, gets down in that 85, 84, too late. And believe me, it gets there, especially if you do not have clothing on. For some reason, I slept in my clothing that night. I took off my shoes, but I had my dungaree jacket, trousers on. And that kept my body temperature in. So here I am. I'm struggling, but some boys now are having such a problem. Okay, let's go through to the second day. The second day, you can imagine 110 degrees, you're swimming nearly constantly. You're taking care of someone. Sometime that day, I'm taking care of my buddy Spooner. He can't see. He needs someone, and he's hanging on. And then he tells me, Harrell, I can't make it. I know I can't make it. And he says, I'm going to swim down so far I'll drown before I come up. I said, Spooner, you're not going to do it. There's only 2 Marines in the group, and there will be 2 Marines when help comes, and help will come. But he convinced me that he's going to do that, and he starts to do that, and I used some effort to make him turn, and I turned him to me. I fastened his kapok jacket onto mine, and we swam together through that night. But let's back up. Sometime that second day now, so hot. Have you ever been thirsty, really thirsty? Have you been so thirsty that your lips now are parched open? They're bleeding. You've got that oil in them. You've got that salt in them. And you're in misery. And now your tongue is swelling in your mouth and you can hardly talk. You are so thirsty. You dare not to drink that salt water. Maybe you didn't know whether or not you could or not, but you have seen what happens. I see buddies that tear off some of their clothing and put some water in a piece of cloth, put their head under it and drink some of that salt water and say it's not too bad, it's about 85 degrees and it's wet. But you just wait an hour. An hour from there, you can see what happened. That particular individual, he doesn't know straight up. He doesn't know his buddy who he would have known at least by face. He thinks that his buddy is a Jap, and he takes out his sheath knife and he attacks his buddy because he's a Jap. Or he sees a buddy that he thinks that has a canteen of water in his kapok jacket, and he takes his knife and he stabs his buddy to get that canteen of water. Now that is happening so much, but it's sometime then this second day when you are so thirsty and you dare not to drink that water because you know what happens every time. You can time it. But to see a little cloud come over like it does here, and it's raining, to see that. And look, it's raining. Look, it's raining. And as that little cloud comes over, what do? Well, you turn your head heavenward and you pray and thank the Lord for a few drops of water, yes. And you maybe have to take your greasy hands and you kind of cup some of that water and you drink a few tablespoons maybe. It's washed your face that's covered with oil. And so that went down with the water. And after a little bit, you know what? That water that you thought was so palatable, all of a sudden you feel it's got to come back out. And it does. It does. And so now then, we go through that second day and the third night now. And after the third night, we go to the third day. Now then, we started with some 80. Third day at noon, 17. What has happened? You can use your own imagination. Shark. Hypothermia at 85 degrees at night. You get out here with hardly any clothing on, 85 degrees and a nice breeze stirring, and your body temperature starts dropping, hypothermia, and then no recovering once it gets at 85 or so below. Or, various things are taking place. And may I say, you cannot swim constantly for 4.5 days. So let's take you into that third day. Third day, there's 17 of us. What's happened? You guessed. Only 17. Now then, there's 2 Marines and 15 sailors. And we're desperate. Why? Our kapok jackets now are so waterlogged that you've got them on, but you've got to keep trying to get your head above water. And you cannot swim constantly. If you let up, then something happens. Okay, so what do? You do the best that you can. You take that kapok jacket off, and you pull it down under. You sit in it. Now, it has the same buoyancy. The only thing, it's a little lower on the body, and in so being a little lower, now you can keep your head out of the water as long as you keep swimming. And if you cease swimming, then it will pitch you, and you don't have the strength to get that kapok jacket back under you. Okay, there's 17, and we're seated in our kapok life jackets. And now, sometime then that afternoon, we came upon a swell, and later in the afternoon, and we said, look, there's something there. What is that? And it's up and we're down, and finally we can see that looks like a raft. A raft? Yeah. And they are close enough that we could holler. They back at us. We know that it has to be our buddies. And so finally the little raft comes closer. We're going closer to them. And finally we meet up. And we see, yeah, there's a little raft. There's 5 sailors around that raft. No one is on the raft. No one on the raft. 5 sailors around that little makeshift of a raft. Now, the raft consists of, let's say, 3 or 4 40-millimeter ammunition cans lashed together, maybe something like an old potato crate, 2 or 3 old crates, orange crates, slatted crates. They're kind of fastened together. And now there's a little raft, and they have taken kapok jackets off of boys that have already expired and squeezed them out and put them up on that, and they're drying out. You ladies know that that old sponge won't hold any more water. It's full, but you squeeze it out, it'll hold more water. You squeeze that kapok jacket out, it'll hold more water. It has more buoyancy to it. And so when they came into our group, they said two things. Number one, take off your kapok jackets, and they showed us how to squeeze them out, and they put them on that raft, and they give us one that has a little more buoyancy to it. And then they said, we have to get closer enough to the Philippines because we see planes flying over 30,000 feet. No one's looking for us, and we have to get closer to the Philippines. And they said, anyone want to join us? And I say to my Marine buddy, I said, Spooner, I'm going to go with them. And he said, Harrell, if you go, I'm going to go with you. 2 Marines joined 5 sailors, and we think we're going to go to the Philippines. We didn't know it was another 500 miles, but when you see your group now of 80 and there's only 17, it's time to do something. So 2 Marines joined those 5 sailors, and those 15 other sailors, and they thought we were crazy. But may I say, they not a one of those 15 survived. Sad to say, 2 Marines joined 5 sailors, and now you can believe that the good Lord was watching over someone, can't you? And so here we are. 2 Marines joined 5 sailors, and we think we're going to make it to the Philippines. Now, we know that the sun goes down in the west. The Philippines is somewhere there. We didn't know it was 500 miles, but we're making our way. And sometime then, later that afternoon, we came up on a swell, and I could look off at a distance, and I saw some debris out there. And I called attention to the rest. Look, there's something out there. I don't know what it could be, but look, every now and then we could see it's maybe just a crate. At first I thought maybe it's one of our buddies, but no. And finally I said, I'm going to swim out and see what that might be. It could be food or water, and they said maybe a shark would get you. But there was a compelling influence saying, go and see. And so I have my kapok jacket on now, and I'm swimming, doing a pretty fast dog paddle, getting closer and closer. I get close to that crate. You know, what I saw, I didn't pause and thank you, Lord, what I'm about to partake of, but I saw those potatoes in that crate, and in desperation, I'm reaching for that first potato, and I could see them just floating on the top, and I got that first potato, but kind of in the agony of defeat as I squeeze that, all that rot is squeezing through my fingers, and then to take that and peel some of it with your hands, but then take that and take your teeth and you peel and spit, and it's solid on the inside. I might say that's my water and that's my food now for 5 days. And so my buddies see that I'm eating something. What is it? Rotten potatoes. They leave the little raft and they came out and joined me. And then we had a little picnic. Now then, you know, we know the sun goes down in the west, and so we are heading now toward the west someplace. But it isn't long until the sun is gone. There's no moon. There's no Southern Cross. Now it's dark. It's after 12 o'clock, and it's black. And we hear voices. Now, may I say, there's many times you can hear things that aren't there. You can see things, believe me, that aren't there. But we heard voices, and we responded, and it isn't long until they got closer and closer to us. And here it's Lieutenant McKissick from Texas. Now, I knew him aboard ship in that he was the officer of the deck many times. I was the captain's orderly, and he was like an uncle to me because the greenhorn that I was, he would give me a message, and he'd say, "Hey, Marine, repeat that back," before he would send me to embarrass myself. And so he would maybe correct me, and then finally he would send me out. That was McKissick. Now, McKissick, maybe 1, 2, 3, maybe as many as 5 boys or more. But as they came in by voice. You couldn't see to tell who your buddies were with you from the ones that just came in. But when they came in, 2 things. We had some partly dried kapok jackets that we gave to McKissick. Take off your kapok jacket. We squeezed it out, and there was a Marine that had a pocket full of half-rotten potatoes, and probably others. We had put those that were in that crate in our pockets, and so we shared those with McKissick. Okay, now we struggled through that night. Now we come through the night, and that's the 4th night now. We come to the next is the 4th day. And so the 4th day, now I had been with that raft. I had been with my buddy Spooner, and when Spooner joined me, we fastened him on to that raft. And so now it's the 4th morning. I'm with McKissick, 1 other sailor. Where's the raft? Nowhere to be found. Where's Spooner? Nowhere to be found. And we're in maybe 6 to 8 feet of swells, and we're desperate. I look at this one sailor that's with us, and I saw what I had seen so many times, and I often say, it's much easier to die than it is to live. To die, all you have to do is just give up. And I went to check him, and his head looked like it dropped in the water. I shook him, he responded, and I tried to tell him to hang in there, buddy. We'll have help here in the morning. Hang in there. And okay, he's responded a little bit. I look back a few minutes later, the same thing. The 3rd time I go to check him, it's too late. He's gone. So it's just McKissick and myself. And McKissick had asked me, hey, Marine, you ever been to the Philippines? No, we knew that's where we were going with the ship. And his response was, when we get there, you know, he promised to he had been there, he'd take me under wing. And okay, so now I'm just with McKissick. Don't know about Spooner. But we see our B-29s, 30,000 feet up there. We see the trail, and we know what's happening. They are firebombing Tokyo. And we know that they aren't looking for us. No one even knows we're out there. We're desperate. And then all of a sudden, I hear a plane. I hear a plane. I hear a plane. I see a plane. Okay, and I saw a plane. Let me bring you into perspective what is happening. Number 1, I saw a plane. And number 2, he was coming in. And number 3, I'm excited, waving, waving, waving. Thank you, Lord. Look, he's coming in. Rescue at last, I thought. No, 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 no. Let me take you up there. Lieutenant Gwynn flying out of Palau in that Ventura. I call it a B-25. It has twin engines, wheels, and I see him. He's coming in. Now, let me take you up there. If he's flying, let's say, a few thousand feet, he's looking forward of him, let's say, 4 miles. He's looking out at his peripheral vision, 2.5 miles each side. He's looking at 20 square miles. And to see a man's head down there 6 by 8 inches, no, impossible, impossible. Let me take you back up there. Lieutenant Gwynn, flying out of Pellew, he had detected that stabilizer on that antenna had come off, and it was just flipping back and forth, and he couldn't call back. He had to be up 5,000 to 7,000 feet to communicate with his base back in Pellew. So he was useless now to be down low, but maybe take you back up there. Gwynn says to the co-pilot, take over control. I'm going to go aft. I'm going to pull in that so-and-so antenna, and I'm going to put a stabilizer on it, and so it'll trail true, or we can't call base. Okay, he's done that. And co-pilot takes over. He goes aft. He opens that bomb bay door. He glances down at a split second, and what did he see? Well, I spoke to the 100th anniversary of the Boy Scouts out in Spokane, 5,400 scouts. I said, you know what he saw? He saw your little mirror. He saw the sun hit the oil on the water, and when he saw that, that told him that there's a Jap sub down there, because America had no subs there. And so he rushes back to take over control. He gets the speaker and he says, load the bombs, load the bombs. We see him, he's coming in. And he was coming in. He had his bombs loaded. He was coming in for bear. But as he was coming in, thinking there's a Jap sub down there someplace, as he gets down, he begins to see at a distance debris, and then he comes down. May I say, I can see him today. I can see him today as he came down over McKissick and myself, and as he tilted those wings. I can see his visage in that aircraft as he circled us, and he's saying, I see you. Help is on the way. He leaves and goes back up. He has to go back up at a distance to reach back to Pellew to announce ducks on the pond. Whose ducks? No one knows. But he gets in touch with Lieutenant Adrian Marks, a pilot of a PBY, and he tells him our coordinates out there, and Marks says that he's loaded, ready to go out on a search and destroy, and he gets the coordinates. He says, that'll take me an hour and a half to get there. And so Gwynn tells him that I'll stay as long as I can, because so far boys have scattered over 25 miles. But he says, I may not can stay till you get here, because I'm running out of fuel. I've got to get back to Pellew. And so as Marks comes on, he passes over a destroyer, and he tells them that there's boys scattered ahead of you a certain distance, and Commander Clater says, you know, I'll open it wide open until I get close enough that I have to slow down for fear of running into someone. And so now Marks is coming. He's coming. And he came. And I can see him today. You can imagine the excitement when you see that big PBY coming in. Now, he had tried to get permission to do an open sea landing, and they tell him, no way. No way do you set that big goose down in a 8-foot swell. But as they flew over, boys, they saw maybe some boys on a big floater net. That might have been 50 boys, and some groups of boys, just 2 or 3 life rafts, and most everyone but just singles. And so here we are, McKissick and myself. And so finally, here comes that big PBY. and he circled around, dares not to stop at a big group, that'd sink his plane. So all he could do is disobey orders and set that big goose down and pick up whomever he could. And it didn't matter with him whether they were Japanese or Americans, but as he set it down, he began to pick up boys. Now, as he set it down, though, here's what happened. I can see that today as the tail of that aircraft is getting low, and he's about as slow as he can go and still be flying. And that tail of that aircraft hit a swell and kind of helped to pitch that aircraft, and he dumped in. I didn't see what he hit, but I'll talk to them later. That nose came in, that right prop hit that swell, it would never run again. And so he has just that one prop now. Now, all he can do is not go into that bank of water. All he can do is run the swells and pick up stragglers. Well, he's picked up several now. Before I knew, he picked up McKissick, and I was in hopes that McKissick told him as a Marine out there, maybe a swell or two between us. And so finally, he comes down the swell that I'm in. Never stop. That one prop is going to go straight regardless. And so they dragged me over in a hurry, and I'm jerked into that aircraft. And it isn't long till, they've stacked us in there. And may I say, 56 boys. He picked up 56. You know anything about the fuselage of that PBY? You say it won't hold 56. My response is, it will if you tie 7 out on the wings. I've got a buddy down in Chattanooga, still living sailor. He was tied out on the wings. And so anyway, he picked up 56. I'm aboard now, and it isn't long. Okay, now you're not sitting, certainly not standing. You're like a sack of feed. You're stacked against a buddy, and no one can get up. You're helpless. But I look across and I see a blonde-headed boy, oil, eyes sore, and so on. My buddy Spooner, and I saw what Spooner was doing. They had drank up the little water that they had, so what's the best thing they could give him? They gave him a can of green beans, okay? And not the kind with you can flip the top open. So what is Spooner doing? He can't see, but he can feel, and he felt something down on the depth of the aircraft. He knocked a hole in that can of green beans, and he turns it up, and he's drinking the juice. And I know Spooner, and I said, Spooner, give me some of your bean juice. And you have to know Spooner. Spooner told me where I could get off. And I said, Spooner, you don't know who this is. This is Corporal Harrell. And he kind of fell across a buddy with his bean juice. Okay, now then, it isn't long then till the Doyle comes in. And as the Doyle got closer and closer, I can see this today. You can imagine sometime after midnight or so, and it's dark, and we're in that aircraft, and finally, they shut off the motor because the swells now are down maybe 5 or 6 feet, so they're not too much danger there. And then here the Doyle comes in. He turns on all of his light, any lights that he could shine up to those clouds overhead. He let everybody know within miles help is on its way. So he comes and dares not to travel now where the boys are, but he picks up what he can and then knows that he's got to wait until daybreak and there's many other destroyers that will be there in the morning. So we head then for Paloux. And so, okay, we get to Paloux, and we're there a day, day and a half, and then we're being doctored all that they can, but we need help. We need a lot of medication. And so they put us aboard a big hospital ship and bring me to Guam. Okay, it's a long story here, but let me cut it short a little bit. I'm in the hospital in Guam. I'm completely just rotten. I mean, under your arms, any place that your clothing has rubbed you, you've got that oil, you've got that salt, and it's infected. And so what can they do? Okay, they can send 2 sailors down below deck, and they take diesel fuel or kerosene and give you a kerosene bath to get that oil off. Now then, what happens to that flesh? It's coming off, and it comes off because you're just rotting away. And when it comes off, what's next? Blood, blood, blood. So what do? You know what Vaseline is? Cover you with Vaseline, wrap you in Vaseline gauze. And so finally I then make it from there to the hospital in Guam. So I get to the hospital there, doctoring. Finally, after another month or so, I make it back to the States October the 2nd. I'm back in the States. Okay, I think that I'm going home 90 days because I'd been overseas a good while. But the night of the 3rd, I had a hurting in my side. I thought I couldn't endure till morning to get a hold of the sergeant that was in charge to tell him I had to go to sick bay. And he comes and he says, we'll get an ambulance. I said, no, I know where sick bay is. I went through boot camp and sea school here. And so anyway, I think that I can make it. But I ended up, they sent me to Balboa Hospital. Okay, I get there, they take my white blood count, and they said, hey, Marine, we can't operate. Can't operate? No, we cannot. And they didn't for 29 days. But they had a new medication. You know what penicillin was back then? I didn't know, but I found out. Every 2 to 4 hours, I became a pincushion for 29 days. They gave me 11,800,000 units of penicillin, they tell me later. They knew what they gave me. I finally got over that, got back home. I think it was the 6th of January. In other words, the next year from July 30. Okay. It wasn't until, I guess my first book came out in 2005, and I think I've been in 38 states. The second book came out in 2014, and again, I've been in those, maybe the same 38 states, many states, several times. I've traveled the country now these many years, telling of God's mercy and grace in this old Marine's life down through these years. And I thank you so much, Pastor Tom, for the opportunity to come back again and just to share with you not only my story, but the story of God's providence and His mercy and His grace to His followers, His dear people. And I just thank Him again for this opportunity to come and to share with you. Thank you so kindly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Please be seated. Ed, something you said about being on that ship, holding on to the rail and looking out into darkness. To me, that was a picture of a soul looking out into eternity. And without Jesus, that's what you're looking out into, an uncertain darkness. And I just want to take a moment this morning, just a quiet moment for us to bow our heads and to just have a few seconds of quiet to think about what you've heard. Maybe God is right now opening your heart. Maybe right now He's opening your eyes to see that without Jesus, all you have is an uncertain darkness. Jesus comes into the heart and He saves the soul, bringing light and hope and purpose. Because indeed that darkness that we're looking out into